Welcome to the Adventurers Club of Los Angeles. My name is Rich Mayfield, member 1211. I'm here tonight with Michael Hamson. And Michael, you are an art dealer, is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm an art dealer, a private art dealer, specializing in Oceanic Art, which are those kind of older museum quality artifacts from the South Pacific. Everything from Hawaii down to Maori in New Zealand, Australia, I think Fiji, Tonga, but mostly New Guinea. My main expertise and my main business is buying and selling older artifacts from New Guinea.
So art dealer does just sound like a job, but it sounds like one of those jobs that there's a lot to unpack underneath it. So we're here to talk tonight about some of your, what would we call it, exploits? Field collecting in Papua New Guinea?
I have a master's degree in African and Oceanic art history from UC Santa Barbara. But for the beginning of my career, for 15 years from 1994 to 2009, I made 46 trips to Papua New Guinea field collecting.
Wow.
I had a house there, I had a whole crew of workers there, and that's what I credit for the foundation of my knowledge and my experience is the time I spent in the field. Going to as many remote villages as I possibly can, having literally thousands and thousands of objects pass through my hands, really gave me a great foundation to do what I do now, which is now I stopped field collecting in 2009, so now I buy and sell from collections all over the world.
So is the idea, the deeper you go into the heart of darkness, so to speak, the deeper you go, the more authentic and valuable stuff you can find?
Well, in theory, it doesn't quite work out like that. I mean, you never know. I mean, I myself always wanted to go to places that other people hadn't gone to. I'm not a thrill seeker, I'm an art dealer, but I wanted to find things that hadn't been seen before. You know, I was motivated by trying to find like masterpieces. You know, I mean, every country in the world has their own great artists. And in Papua New Guinea, they're prolific art producers and they have some world-class artists over the centuries. And a lot of that material was still in the field. So in my opinion, it was almost like my ability to go back in time into the 1600s in Holland and find a Rembrandt, or 1907 in Paris and find a Picasso. And my intent was to go into remote places in Papua New Guinea and see if I can find a masterpiece.
Can you tell us a little bit about this guy? He just popped up on the screen.
Oh yeah, well that was actually one of my very first trips field collecting. And I think it's a good introduction in the sense that I was in an area, and I go to an area and I start spreading the word around that you know, I'm American, I'm an art dealer, I'm an artifact buyer. I called it an artifact buyer at the time, and I'm looking to buy older traditional things. And I spread the word to the villages, and you just wait and see what people offer. And this old man happened to call me to his house, and he brought out this enormous feasting bowl and wanted to sell it. And it was kind of an interesting experience because some of his family members didn't want him to sell it, right? But he was like, no, you know, let me tell you, I used to be the chief, but now I'm too old, right? So when you're a chief, you had to sponsor all these big feasts. You had to fill these big, large bowls up with food. He says, I'm no longer a chief, you know, that time has passed, it's my bowl, I want to sell it.
It's almost like a downsizing, huh?
Yeah, I mean, you could see in his face, the kind of, the pride in the guy's face and the kind of, the melancholy about that period in his life has passed, and you know, and then he sold me the bowl.
So when you do buy this stuff, cash?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, normally cash, just cash. I mean, there was actually, believe it or not, I had a checking account there, and I would write checks. And people would say, oh yeah, that's smart, because they're always worried about, you know, stealing, people robbing you or something like that. Write the check, you know. But it got very complicated, because then you're having to write a check, and it's like, okay, you give it to one guy, and he has to split it up between 15 people, and it's like...
See, that's interesting, because I would have thought that it's some sort of barter. You know, you got to bring in goods like a boat engine, or you know.
No, they're part of the world economy. Even the very, very remote places, you know, they need money.
A check.
They don't have the cash. It was one period in my life that was checks, but it was kind of a novelty. And by and large, it's cash. You know, they're mostly subsistence farmers. You know, they're living like they've lived in the remote places for hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, and They go out to the gardens every day and grow their crops, and they hunt at night for whatever protein they can. So they don't really have a large need for cash, except for like school fees. Even their small children in a very local school, they have to pay a nominal amount for school fees. So they do need cash a little bit, but they're not dependent on it.
So just to orient, as you mentioned that oceanic art, can you kind of define oceanic? And we just pulled up this graphic of Papua New Guinea.
Right. Well, basically, it's anything from the South Pacific. So in the north, it's Hawaii in the north, and you have Easter Island in the east, and then you have all the Polynesian islands, Fiji, Tonga. You have the Melanesian islands, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Solomon Islands.
What's the northwestern bound? I think we kind of...
Probably, I think Hawaii is as far, definitely far north as you get.
And then what about up into the west there?
There's still Hawaii, there's not much else out there. So it's Hawaii, and then down probably to the south is the Maori in New Zealand, and Australian Aboriginal. But the majority of the art objects in the oceanic art market are from New Guinea. I mean, it's such a prolific art producing country that that amounts to 70 or 80.
Because they've been there forever, right? That's one of the
40,000 years, and there's 700 or 800 cultures, of which a large percentage of them produce some form of art. And that's part of not the problem, probably the fun really is trying to decide, well, what's art? What is it? I mean, none of the pieces that they created obviously were intended as art. They had uses. So often figurative sculpture were actual manifestations of ancestral spirits. But then they had wood food bowls like that, they had drums, they had food pounders. You come across all sorts of stuff, and it's kind of your decision as an art dealer to say, is this art? I mean, does this pass from the realm of artifact or craft into the realm of art? And it's kind of up to me to kind of look at it and try to decide, can I display this? Can I sell it?
And the market validates at the end of the day, right?
Well, you hope so. For sure.
Well,
you have to find a buyer.
Along those lines, what do you think the percentage of, you bring back 100 artifacts? How many of those are validated by the market as being a piece of art and you get to sell?
Shockingly small. Shockingly small.
Are we talking like 5, or are we talking like
5 to 10?
5 to 10%?
I mean, most of the stuff I'm buying, especially in the early days when I was just super excited to be out there, super excited to find authentic pieces, I was buying like these lime gourds, so just dried out gourds with like wooden sticks that they would keep the lime, the calcium carbonate they use when they cheat beetle nut. I mean, there's no market value for those, but I was just so excited. Oh my God, here's a really true, authentic tribal object. And I was buying those, and I was buying all sorts of drums and wooden bowls and personal decoration, shell jewelry. And just because it was available, and I was just excited to have it, and it was old, and it was kind of cool. But that stuff is impossible to sell. What the market wants, the higher end market wants is sculpture. And a lot of times you didn't find much. A lot of times you go to these places and you're asking for figures, mass shields, and the people are looking at it like, no, we never had anything like that. They had some arrows or something like that, but that's it. So you may spend a week or 10 days walking into a very remote place and not getting anything.
So what's on the west side of the map, the left side?
That's disputed. I think now it's called West Papua. It's I think officially part of Indonesia. But they call it West Papua. It's disputed. They want independence.
So as far as art goes, though, I would imagine that this, the culture is fairly spread out. So is there anything over there, or
there are some wonderful art producing cultures on the Indonesian side as well. But it's a much different, difficult logistically to go in there and get permits and hire boats or. You had to get police permits to go to all the remote areas that I travel very freely within Papua New Guinea. You have to get all this kind of bureaucratic permits that I didn't want to go through. So I stuck to Papua New Guinea.
So there's a more out of the way place. But let's look at this next picture. You've got the this is a view from a plane. Is that basically how you get to any place?
The thing I want people to know about Papua New Guinea is that, number one, it's a wonderful country. And I think there's roughly 4.5 million people at this point, and there's very little infrastructure. There's very little road system. So probably 70% of the country is inaccessible. even though there's a lot of areas that don't have populations or villages out there, but it was my job to find those areas that were both remote but had population centers, because you need population centers for artifacts. You need people in villages, hopefully remote villages, that might still have those things. So I had all the very detailed maps of the entire country, and I was just poring over all these hundreds of maps and just finding areas that might have like a missionary airstrip that I can get myself into that area, and then hire some local guys to start showing me around, and I'd have my maps. I'd start pointing out these are the places I want to go. So this photo here is just about just a typical grass airstrip in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. And they're usually serviced by MAF, the Missionary Air Fellowship planes that were built to fly supplies in and out for the missionaries that fly passengers like me as well. So that's a typical grass.
So we're looking at where you're going to land right there.
Yeah, that's where you're going to land. That's where you're going to land. There's a lot of danger in Papua New Guinea, and some of these flights are the ones where you really
are pretty hairy.
Exactly, because the strips are. You never know how they've cut the grass, right? They don't, it's a matter of, do they cut the grass? All they have is bush knives, right? And maybe they hadn't cut the grass for 4 weeks, and then the grass is that high or something, so you don't know. So yeah, and the weather is, if these are in the mountains, the storms and the weather it's pretty, the flights are hairy for sure.
So these are all developed based on Christian or Catholic missionaries going in there. They built, and you're hitching a ride with them on there.
The Missionary Art Fellowship was founded to service those guys, but they also bring out local people going to the market, or there's sick patients needing to go to the hospital, or that you can just buy a ticket to say, hey, look, they have a schedule. It's like we fly once a week to this particular airstrip, and it's like, okay, on every Thursday we'll go in there, and the next Thursday we'll take you out. Or I'll look at a map and I'll say, well, wait a second. There's a village about, 4 days walk away. Okay, drop me off here Thursday, pick me up here Wednesday, you go there.
How much are those flights?
No, they're $100, $150.
Wow.
They're totally inexpensive, but they're made for the local people.
Right.
So it's not, they're often just a 4-passenger Cessna,
So this is this is from one of those grass strips.
Yeah, this is the typical thing. You just land on the grass strip, you dump your stuff out. There's usually a big crowd, greets the plane. We're meeting some of the relatives that might be on the plane, or just curiosity or something like that.
And are you pulling in a crew too? Like what did your setup look like? Because the airstrip is just the beginning of the trek.
Exactly. Usually, I had 3 or 4 full-time guys who worked for me that I trained. So I would always bring at least one, if not 2. And so they would always come with me, and I'd have my own cargo, and I'd bring my own food. I'd bring my own food, not just for me and my guys, but for whatever guys we're going to be hiring, and for how many days we might be, walking around a week. So you might have 30 kilos of rice and all this type of stuff. So that when you land on a place like this, you immediately start asking around, okay, who's the village leader? Who's the village, what they call the council? They had a local level government where each village had an elected person they called the council, who was like their spokesperson. So I'd find that person, and I'd discuss with them. I'd bring out my maps, and I'd say, look, here, I'm an artifact buyer from California, and these are the places I want to go, and I need 4 guys to go with me, starting in a half hour, and bring a bush knife, and that's it, and I'll provide the food, and we'll find accommodation, and you'd be surprised that how many people volunteer.
Yep, I'm game.
Exactly, because it's a bit of an adventure. It's always these guys, 16, 18, 20 years old, and they're like, yeah, man, we'll go.
Yeah.
And so then you got, I'll have 1 or 2 of my own guys, and I'll have 3 or 4 of these other guys to take me to this village, and start buying artifacts.
And your guys would act as translators, I imagine?
No, there's so many languages there that everybody speaks Melanesian talk pigeon, and I speak it. So, I was communicating. Just they more act like as somebody I could trust completely. It's like, okay, you take this cargo here. I'm buying artifacts. I'm handing it to my guys to put in the bags and stuff like that.
So you just pull up this picture, and it appears like you did a lot of walking. What's going on there?
This is No, there are some roads. I was trying to tell you is that there's very little infrastructure in Papua New Guinea, and there are some roads, but are often dirt roads or graded roads, not asphalt. And then you definitely have it's a struggle. You hire 4-wheel drive cars, and you have problems. Like this is a river. There's no bridge on some of these rivers, so you have to when it's dry, you can cross it, and when it floods, you have to basically sit on the other side of the road and wait for the water level to drop. And then you're waiting hours, sometimes days, and then finally you're like, screw it, let's give it a shot. And sometimes it works, and then sometimes, like this time, it didn't work. And this is actually a truck I rented from Avis.
Yeah. You bought the insurance, didn't you?
And I'm taking the photograph. It's hard to see, but I'm actually lucky. They were doing some road work, so there was a bulldozer in there. So once the truck got caught in the current there, I hired the bulldozer to he had to go into the river and push us out from the back until he squashed our back in and pushed up the other side of the bank. We had to open up the door and all the water came out. And we drove around for another week or something like that, and I turned the car in and it really smelled, and they're looking at this thing all beat up. It was a stiff charge. That's what we did. So,
wow.
I mean, not a lot of what we did was vehicles.
Yeah.
It's Papua New Guinea, it's an island, so a lot of it's by boat.
Right.
It's along the coast. I did a lot of stuff on the coast. There's a lot of very few roads connecting the towns or the villages. So you basically go to one area and then you hire a boat for a week and just go up and down the coast.
Now this is more of a canoe though. When you're
right.
Yeah.
And there's also tons of rivers. So it all depends on where you're going or where you're trying to access. But it's. So yeah, there's a lot of time in canoes and a lot of time in boats. So
kind of getting back to the thing you said that the theory is the deeper you go, the more interesting stuff. So
right, I'd have to say that didn't really work. I mean, I have to say because it was fun, it was exciting, it was cool, and I did occasionally get some really interesting things, totally new to the market. But if you stick to the kind of the normal areas, I might have potentially done better for my own business. But this suited me perfectly.
You feel like it was a good learning experience getting out there?
It's unbelievable. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's you can look at objects in books, right? You can look at them and say, okay. You can look at thousands of objects in books, or you can go to museums and look at the objects in museums, and you can kind of understand it. You can appreciate it. And you can even handle a lot of objects, right? And you kind of start to get a feel for the art in a different way. But when you're actually in these villages and you're trying to buy the objects, so you have this whole set of experiences of like spending 8 hours walking in the mountains, sweating like a dog to get to a village, sending out the word what you're looking for, and then people bringing stuff, and then they see that as they carry it. And the old man, the look in his face as he hands it over, and then the story he tells about it, and then you have it in your hand, and you're trying to decide if you're going to buy it, right? So you're looking at what's good about it, or you're looking at what's bad about it. So you're making all these kind of like calculations in your mind that just kind of like burn into your memory. So you do that over thousands of times. That's how you really get a feel for the art of that area. You get it much. It's impossible to compare. My feel for the art for most other people.
How does that feel when you mentioned some guy brings you something that's obviously precious to him. He's going to sell it. That's his intent. And maybe you're going to make the call and say no. How does that feel?
Well, you don't want to say no too many times, actually. I mean, you mean refuse something that he's bringing, or what do you mean? Right.
I mean, basically, you're going to reject something, and that guy values it.
Maybe I hired high standards. I rejected a ton of stuff, but I also bought a ton of stuff because I called it priming the pump, right? Because you have to put money in people's hands. They have to take you serious, and to understand what you're doing. You have to buy things. You have to, you're paying good money, months' wages to people for objects that they thought were useless. Mm-hmm. So once people start seeing money going into their neighbors' hands, they're like, whoa, okay. So then they start bringing stuff. And it's like, oh, yeah, I have one of those, and I have one of those. And then, then there's a bit of a momentum going. And then after that, then occasionally you'll see something good. So you have to prime the pump to get something good.
Yeah. Did you ever buy something you felt bad about it? Like someone was like, oh man, this is like a family heirloom and this guy really doesn't want to part with it.
You do. Occasionally you do like that, but it's their decision, right? They're adults, just like all of us, right? All of us have things from our grandparents probably. When my grandmother died, I inherited most of her antiques,
Yeah.
And I carried all that stuff through all of my colleges and apartments and when I was younger. Going to storage unit to storage unit, and some things you sell, some things you give away, some things you keep, but that's a decision that we make.
Right.
We decide, that's not that important to me, but this is, and you whatever, give it away, sell it at a garage sale, sell it at a swap meet or whatever, and these people make those exact same decisions,
That's interesting, getting back to that first bowl that you showed. Mm-hmm. Obviously, like that meant a lot to his family. And this guy was like, I'm done with this, It's all just stuff at the end of the day, right?
Right. Well, you just have to also realize is that, there's more, Papua New Guinea has the most missionaries per capita than any country on earth. Mm-hmm. So the missionaries have already have decades and decades and decades of telling these people that those ceremonial objects are from a different period and that you need to get rid of them. They're from a different belief system that we want you to, drop, and we want you to believe on this.
So that's an interesting aspect. So you're saying that the missionaries have been basically suppressing artwork, how would you put it?
They're in conflict. Most of the time, it's in conflict. It's just especially there's more missionaries per capita in Papua New Guinea, and especially in the last 60, 70 years, they're American evangelical missionaries. So they weren't about blending the culture. It wasn't like, okay, let's take something from your traditional culture and blend it in with this Christian religion.
So an idol,
you guys got to get rid of that.
So that if they had an idol to you is a figurine that's a highly valuable
artifact. So, I mean, the most common refrain when I was going to remote places is that nobody told us this stuff, somebody was going to come and want to buy this. We burned it, or we threw it away. It's gone. Nobody told us that somebody would come at some point and really value this stuff. Because they'd see me paying tons of money to their neighbor, and everybody else is like, we had that. Sometimes they show you in the ground. We burned it here. So. I mean, it's it's every culture, every civilization. We all change,
Way of the world, right?
Just no different than us, right?
This old religious stuff, we're going to burn all that. How many temples have been razed?
I mean, it's their choice. I mean, when the white people came in the 1890s or 1900, they had guns, they had gunpowder, they had boats, and then later they had airplanes and stuff like that. And the people said, holy cow, these people are powerful. The local people got their power from their beliefs and their gods. So these people must have their power from their gods. So it's like, okay, well, they're pragmatic. Let's drop our gods and let's adopt this god because they have, we'll get the same stuff and we'll get to have the same powers because the power, all that stuff comes from the god. So it was a pretty persuasive argument for those people.
And again, it's not an argument unique to Papua New Guinea.
No, of course not.
It's everywhere.
No.
Right? So what are we looking at here?
Well, I mean, in Papua New Guinea, you just have to realize that, I'm focusing on the very remote areas. And Papua New Guinea is a wonderful place. It's a beautiful place. The 99.9% of the people are gracious, hospitable. Like I said, you never have to worry about where you're going to spend the night. Any village you show up to at any time of the night, and so you need a place to sleep, somebody will bark some orders and somebody will start sweeping out a little space of their floor and you'll be able to put up your mats and stuff. But it's not 100% safe. So if you'll see in this photograph here is that we're going to be collecting in those far off mountains. And this area is in Oro province on the inland part of Collingwood Bay. And there were some dodgy characters in some of those areas. So if I was going to an area that I thought might have security issues, I would go to the local police station and hire a policeman. I would just say, hey, look, I'm going to be walking 5 days into this area. I'd show them my map, name the villages. I'd like to hire a guy with a weapon to escort us for 4 or 5 days. Usually it's no problem, And so, I mean, it's just, I don't want to give the impression that Papua New Guinea is dangerous. It's not, it's the fact that 99% of the people are, look after their guests and value their visitors and are incredibly gracious. But, sometimes, I'm carrying a lot of money. And most importantly is I'm having to tell people days in advance
that I'm carrying a lot of money.
I'm covering a lot of money, coming to you, and I want to buy your stuff. So, every once in a while you run into problems.
So how would you kind of get a heads up that you're going into an area with dodgy characters?
Well, first off, once you land in an area, you start hearing the stories, and it's like, okay, usually you can discount them, but sometimes you just get a feeling that they might have problems,
Is this one of your security details here?
Yeah, in fact it is, I mean, it was a great collecting trip. I think it was in a very remote area in the border of like Morro Bay and Gulf Province and Eastern Islands. And I was having a great collecting trip. I had a couple of my guys with me, and it was just wonderful. And I had this great sense of well-being. And one night, and we're sitting in somebody's house by the cooking fire and by the kerosene lamp, and there's a lot of people there, talking stories and bringing artifacts and stuff like that. And then one of my usual guys I take with me kind of walks up behind me and whispers in my ear and says, you see that guy over there across from you with the baseball cap? He's an escaped murderer, and tomorrow he plans on robbing you. And then you just realize how vulnerable you are, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not carrying a weapon. I don't have anybody like that. And, you have a bunch of money, and you're, and so that sense of well-being evaporates, and then you're worried. So in this particular instance, I was like, all right. I just went around to all the village leaders and just say, hey, look, I want to hire 15 guys with bush knives, bow and arrows, whatever, to escort me out of this place. And it worked, right? Those were the guys I hired. Right? Those were the guys I hired. It's like, you just have to take me and my guys and my stuff to the next village, 3 or 4 hours away. I know I'll be safe over there. And this guy, the criminal is not going to attack in that village, or he's not going to attack in some other village. He's just going to attack in the pathway between the villages, So we got off scot-free, but it just shows you, the vast majority of the times it's perfectly safe and it's great, and sometimes it's not.
You are a professional, aren't you? You're good at this.
No, I mean, it's, this is part of business,
Yeah.
This is an interesting episode, this photograph here with these 3 gentlemen in the carvings. I don't know how many of you ever had to run for your life. Well, I've had to run for my life. And it was from the guy in the middle there holding the carving. This was a very remote area called Rawit. And I had heard about it. Actually, I'd read about it in a tribal art magazine when they did a review of the South Australia Museum. And they illustrated a piece collected in 1928 by so-and-so, and they listed the village. And I'm like, wait a second, I know where that is. I looked at my maps, it's like, oh, I could go there. So I made it an intent of mine to make my way to this remote place looking for artifacts. And it was way up this high plateau. You had to do endless hours of switchback to get to this high plateau, and then walk another couple hours to this village. And I had hired a couple guys from the main mission station down below where I'd landed and walked up there. And as we're going through one of the intermediate villages, we pass somebody's house, and there's this guy in the middle, and he's immediately pops up and jumps and gets right in my face. And he just kind of like won't let me move. And then finally I'm able to kind of, with my chin, kind of keep on going down the path and go ultimately to the village that I'm going to spend a few days at. And then the guys with me said, oh, hey, look at, that guy's dangerous. There's, you have to realize in Papua New Guinea, there's one mental hospital in all of Papua New Guinea in the capital. So most have mental health issues, they're stay in the village, and most of them obviously are 100% fine, or just normal people. Well, this guy was homicidal, right? So he had already killed all the dogs in the village. He had already killed all the pigs in the village. the whole village had to actually leave the village and leave him by himself because they knew he was going to kill a man, right?
Yeah.
And I come into the area, right? And so I'm like, oh shit, okay. So I go and collect artifacts for a couple days in this other village. And then the night before, when I have to turn around and start walking back through that exact same village, I can hear something in the distance. I asked the local, what is that? Oh, it's that guy. He's yelling and screaming. His head is hot. And I'm like, oh no, So I said, okay, we're gonna walk through this guy's village. And I said, okay, but the same thing. I'm gonna hire 6 guys. Okay, 3 guys with bush knives and spears in front of me, and 3 guys with bush knives and spears behind me. And we're gonna walk through this guy's village. So as we got close, I told him, I stopped everybody, so this is the plan. You guys are in front of me, you guys are behind me, we're gonna just keep on going. Don't stop, just keep on going right past this guy's house. Yeah. So sure enough, we get by this guy's house, and he's sitting out there on the rock, and he had like some sort of stew or something in this metal dish, and he had dumped it over his head and put the metal bowl as a helmet, and the stew was running down his face. And he just got up and he just got in front of me and wouldn't let me pass. And then I noticed that my guys all disappeared. And then I'm just super frustrated and kind of scared, and I just sit down and I look around. The entire village had taken to the hills above and are watching like an amphitheater, And I'm like yelling, hey, somebody come help me. What can I do? And this guy's just growling in my face and growling in my face. And finally, after like a half hour, a young woman comes down, who's this guy's sister, and tells him, starts trying to tell him, hey, look, you got to come in, you got to get cleaned up. You're embarrassing yourself. You're here with food all over your face. Come into your house and we'll clean you up. And finally, she gets the guy to walk into the house. And as he goes in the house, she turns to me and she says, run. And it's downhill.
Yeah.
So what happens when you run downhill, right? Your legs are just like this, and I hear this guy behind me yelling and screaming as he's chasing after me. And I, just ass over tea kettle into the bushes there. And this guy catches up to me, and he's, steaming mad, but he doesn't do anything, right? So again, we're just sitting there with this guy in my face like this. And then finally I had this idea. I thought, you know what? I call over the sister. I say, you know what? Tell him I want to hire him to help carry some carvings down to the mission station. So my thinking was to give him a job, put something in his hand so his hands are occupied, tell him he's leading us so he's in front of me, not behind me, because it's all these very steep switchbacks over a very kind of precipitous bluff there. And that's what we did. And so we were getting down to the mission station down there. I halted my guys and said, okay, look, we put all the artifacts in, and I'm the last guy in, and then I lock the door. Right? So we had this plan, all the artifacts in. I go in, I lock that door, and then he just goes wild and starts banging on the doors, trying to break in, just yelling and screaming like he's going to knock the place down. And they actually had a police person there, but the police guy didn't want to mess with it. So the only way they could get him to stop was they got a nurse with a hypodermic needle. And she came out and kind of like, okay, you better get out of here, I'm going to give you a shot. And then he ran away. And I'm thinking, I told the police, this guy is obviously going to hurt somebody or kill somebody. Why don't you just arrest him? They're like, oh no, we can't arrest him. Then he'll really get mad.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it's a kind of a typical, not
crazy
experience, but it's one of those things that that you don't expect.
Yeah.
You're enjoying it, you're having a good time, and everything is good until it's not.
Yeah.
So.
Huh. Well, good thing you're from LA and you're used to that.
Yeah, there was plenty of, crime is, unfortunately one of the issues in Papua New Guinea.
Well, that's an interesting thing because you're right, with mental health, right? Same all over the world.
That's right.
Right? So why would you expect anything different because you're in Papua New Guinea?
And also in Papua New Guinea is that, sure there's crime in Papua New Guinea, and then, maybe they get locked up in the prisons and they'll escape, or maybe they'll never get caught. And where do they go? They go to their villages out in the bush.
Yeah.
The exact places I'm going to. So 99% of the people are great, but there's also hardened criminals out there too. Mm-hmm. So you just have to kind of be prepared.
Tell us about this one here.
No, it's just the traveling and, like we were talking about, you do a lot of traveling by aircraft. You do some traveling by four-wheel drive vehicles, some traveling by boat. But predominantly, when you're in Papua New Guinea going to these places, you're on foot. You're walking, days and days and days, hundreds of miles to go to the villages. And since I was going to so many remote places, often there's no roads or paths between the villages, so you end up following the rivers. The rivers are, you follow the rivers up, and you can see these are my guys, like they're carrying their cargo, and then the white sacks are the artifacts that we're going. And, but unfortunately, sometimes you find some good artifacts at day one, and then you have to carry them for 7 or 8 days across, the jungles and the villages and stuff like that.
So is this how the locals would travel too?
Yeah, but they wouldn't. They would keep their kind of their circle fairly close. So I mean, when I hire people to go on a 4 or 5 day trip, they may only feel comfortable for 2 days. Right? They may feel comfortable up to a certain point, a certain village, and then they start freaking out themselves, not really knowing where to go. So it's like, okay, you guys, I'm paying you off. You go back, and I'll hire 5 guys in this village to keep on going and stuff like that. So, yeah,
That's interesting. So you literally hundreds of miles.
Sometimes, if you're walking 10 days, you're walking 8 or 9 hours a day.
Yeah.
Bridges, the bridges are always sketchy in Papua New Guinea. Because they're, number one, most Papua New Guineans are quite small, right? I mean, they're 5'2", 5'3", 110 pounds, 115 pounds. And then here I am, 235 pounds. And so some bridges, this is a very well-made, well-constructed bridge that, you don't like to do it, but you can cross,
Yeah.
And then they get worse. If you can go to the next image, you can see that then the bridges start getting like this, very makeshift and very rickety, and you know that they're not made for 235 pound Americans. And that, I don't have that great a balance, and I'm going to end up in the water. So a lot of those where it's like, forget it, I'm just going to swim anyways,
Yeah.
And then some areas like this one here is that, there are no bridges, but then what you do is you hire guys to make a bridge. So it's like, okay, you're out there, cut down the trees and start laying the logs down, and we need to cross this, this river, and it's either walk for hours either way trying to find a crossing, or you hire these guys to start lashing some logs together across. And then usually what you do then, it may not sound good, but you hire one of the kids. Okay, you go first. They're light, they're nimble, and they like the challenge. And then they go, okay, then it's a heavier guy. Then it's a heavier guy. Then I'm the last guy. Right? So.
It's funny. I'm a big hiker, and as a hiker, you hate getting your feet wet.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting to see you go to such great lengths to, not get wet.
No, you're getting wet. You're constantly getting wet. In fact, most of the time you welcome them. You're so hot. You're so sweaty. It's just, you basically just strip off your clothes and you cool off for 15 minutes or something. But those are kind of rough rivers. But as you continue on, you're going, something. In general, like I said, my main field collecting, you have to go to population centers because the people have the artifacts, right? I'm not just hiking to see the wilderness or whatever. But sometimes, like this slide here, where we couldn't reach the village, so sometimes it's getting dark and we had to sleep under this enormous boulder. 40 or 50 feet tall. And you're just thinking, oh God, please no earthquakes, because that just was like tipping like that. So it was a bit of a disconcerting night's sleep, that's for sure,
Yeah.
But and villages, this is a typical New Guinea village that you show up in, and if it's late in the afternoon or late in the evening, like I said, you ask for who's the village council. Oh, he's not here. Oh, who's the village magistrate? Oh, he's not here. Is there a school teacher? You just try to find somebody of authority that you can pass the word. My name is Michael Hamson. I'm an American artifact dealer. I'm here to look for buying wooden masks, wooden figures, shields, drums, wooden bowls, wooden pillows. I tried to be as explicit as possible. And then I'll pay good money for it. I'll start listing some prices of what something will pay, and people's eyes open wide. And then, some people start bringing stuff, and sometimes they don't. It all depends. But that's like the typical routine. And then, I usually, like I said, I bring a bunch of food, my own food, and so I'll find a place. Somebody will volunteer part of their floor, basically, for my men that they'll sweep out, and they'll lay my camping mat down and string up my mosquito net, and hand out a couple kilos of rice and some of those instant noodles and a couple cans of corned beef or whatever, or canned mackerel, and have them cook it enough for my guys and then their family too. Usually I try to provide enough for like 10 people. That's why I needed all these guys carrying all this stuff, because you're carrying
A lot of rice.
a lot of rice and these hard biscuits and coffee in the morning and stuff like that.
What was the favorite food that you would bring in?
The meat. They love the meat.
Yeah.
They're protein deficient. You know, there's no really large mammals out there except wild boar, and they're harder than hell to get. You know, so unless they were living next to a waterway where they can get fish, they were protein deficient. So they really prized the corned beef or whatever.
It said canned mackerel.
Canned mackerel, man. That's as good as the tuna, I guess, goes here. The mackerel stays there. So it's okay.
Interesting.
We'll just bring a bottle of hot sauce.
Yeah. So it sounds like you took care of people along the way, and that's why you're pretty successful.
Yeah, and I also tried to pay a lot. My mentality was, hey, look, I'm a businessman. If I see an object that that I would buy in New York for $1,000, and because I can sell it for $2,000, if I have to pay $1,000 in a New Guinea village to get it, I'm going to pay $1,000 to get it.
Wow.
Because I'm going to make money. Either way, I'm going to make money. And then in the end, that works for you, right? Because then these people are blown away that they got this type of money. The word spreads that there's this crazy American guy here paying top dollar for you have to have vision. It's like somebody walking in your neighborhood, knocking on your door and saying, hey, look, I'm buying old sneakers, VCRs, cast iron skillets, old Levi's, Elvis records. And you're like, yeah, okay, no, I'm not really interested. And then you see me go across to your neighbors, and then I pay $500 for a cast iron skillet. You're like, hey, wait. And you start, I think I might have one of those. And you start digging around in your thing. And that's how it is. Those are the type of money, the equivalent in funds that you're paying for stuff that most people have discarded or no longer thought was valuable or no longer used, right? So yeah, my mentality is to basically pay as much. Then the word spreads, and then the more stuff comes my way.
Huh. So, I've been waiting to ask this question. What do you think? What's your best get? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's the best piece that you pulled? And was it in the middle of nowhere, or was it in a?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of my techniques was that, okay, here's a known classic art producing center, right? And so most people would go into it on a river or something like this and just go into the heartland of that area and maybe get to the outer edges of a particular area. So my technique was, okay, I'm gonna fly in and drop off at an airstrip way over here. And I'm gonna approach that art producing area from a totally different direction, from the super remote side. Nothing, you're just bushwhacking for days and days and days. And then as you get close, a day or two away, you start seeing fragments of carvings. Oh yeah, this is all we have, is just little pieces of bits and stuff like that. Okay, I'm getting close. And then the few real masterpieces I've gotten were, as I got to beyond the outer edge, where the other people who wanted to go to that area stopped at the outer borders, but didn't go beyond the outer borders, so I stumbled across the few.
So what was your favorite?
I still have it, actually. It's an unbelievable bowl. It's just this leaf-shaped bowl, very deep, and then it has two projections coming off. It's a leaf-shaped bowl, so slightly pointed ends, and two projections coming off of it, and then a hook, one hook going this way, down, a very sharp, dark hook this way, and the other projection, a hook going up like this. And it's just an unbelievable piece of art. It's ancient, it's pre-contact. And my business, what you're trying to find is pre-contact. You're trying to find objects that were carved with stone tools before there was iron introduced, without any kind of missionary influence. It's pure, spiritually pure, aesthetically pure, construction-wise pure. And so this bowl is like a once in a lifetime. There's nothing like that ever exists. And I originally sold it for a ton of money to a high-end New York collector, who then ran into legal problems some years later and had to put it up at auction at Sotheby's, and I bought it back. And I still have it up in my bedroom.
So that's interesting because we talked earlier about, you said you wouldn't consider yourself a collector. But that piece.
But I would still sell it, but it's in my bedroom, so nobody sees it. So, I mean, you know, there's clients of mine who say, look, I'm gonna buy that bowl off you. It's like, oh yeah, you know, at some point maybe, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, the few pieces I actually keep for myself, it's actually my wife who says, oh no, we better hold on to that, you know. But I'd sell anything, you know. I have no, you know, what I do with my business model is that I write catalogs, right? I've done 20 books or catalogs now on the Art of the South Pacific. And so when I have great pieces, it's like, okay, I'm gonna research the hell out of them. I'm gonna make a display stand, have them photographed as best as humanly possible, find the very best angle of it. So I do the research, I write essays on it, I'll hire academics to write essays, and I'll publish it. And that way, that piece is now always mine, right? I don't have to own the piece anymore.
Right.
Now it's set in stone. So I don't have any desire to own that piece. Once I give the true honor of that piece to make it as best as possible, for me to add whatever value I can, aesthetically or research or scholarly wise, to the piece and publish it, that is super satisfying. And it takes the place of me ever actually wanting to permanently own something. I don't really want to permanently own any of it. Because once it's in my books, then I get the money, I sell it, I get the money and buy another masterpiece, you know, and repeat the process ad infinitum, you know, so.
That's interesting. So most of this stuff goes to private collectors?
Some museums, but museums, you know, I mean, you know, maybe the people at the Pacific Asian Museum know, they don't have a lot of money. You know, they're struggling. They have struggled to find money to pay their staff, let alone to acquire stuff. So very few museums. I mean, I sell to the Quai Branly occasionally in Paris, the Bowers Museum here in Southern California. A few museums, but mostly it's and some museums in Australia. But no, it's mostly private collections. We then obviously donate to museums.
Right. But that's cool though that first, like you said, you capture that piece. Like that piece is known. It's
yeah,
it didn't like disappear into a collection, so to speak.
And my name is always associated with it. I mean, that's the thing about art, not just my type of art, but plenty of art. And I wrote about this in my last catalog actually, is that, you know, you may own a piece for 5 years or 10 years, right? And you consider it, that's my piece, right? But then you sell it, and that guy may own it for 5 or 10 years. And to him, that's his piece. So you may have this long history of people who all just kind of like, that's my child, that's my piece, you know? So, I mean...
but you were the first person to bring it out of obscurity.
Well,
basically
that period of time,
shine light on it.
You know, but that's not the case nowadays. Now I'm buying pieces in Berlin or New York or St. Louis or wherever I can find them, you know? So
the good stuff floats to the top, right?
You try. You try. You know, you try to let it be known that you're willing to pay more than anybody.
So this definitely is not Berlin.
That's in New Guinea again. I mean, that was the old days. That was like field collecting in this Umboy Island, this high volcanic mountain with some remote villages up there. They had these wonderful wooden bowls, and they were these were used as both obviously for food preparation and food servicing, but they were also used as an exchange, as an item of wealth. So a lot of houses would have 15 or 20 bowls in the rafters. And I was only looking for the great ones, the ones with like cool faces on the ends or something. So instead of having the people bring down all the stuff out of the rafters, it's like, don't worry about it, I'll go up there, you know. I was thinner then, and I was more fit, and I could walk up there, and you could feel the raft, the whole house. And then I just go through there with a flashlight in my mouth and just start dusting off these bowls, looking for the great ones. And it got so that I didn't have to go there. I could just see from the bottom rim of the bowl, the shape of it. The old best ones had a certain fatness to them and bluntness on the end, so I could just look and say, oh no, that's the one. You know, send a kid up there, get it, that one. Like I said, that's the beauty of field collecting. You know, just having hundreds and hundreds of those bowls in your hand. You know?
And you were able to tune your eye so you could tell the difference between stone carved and.
Oh yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's easy now. What I tell my clients is that you judge by style. You just like anything, right? There's a difference between a Model T Ford and a Prius.
Right.
We all know that. We can spot it a million miles away. Well, the New Guinea art is the exact same thing. And once you've seen enough of it, it's like, that's a Model T Ford and that's a Prius. And, you know,
Interesting.
it's that easy. And what I also tell people is like, look at the difference between a mannequin and a real woman, right? You can just walk, and you can see 500 mannequins and one real woman, and how long will it take you to recognize it? Still,
Yeah.
you know.
But it is interesting though, because if you aren't tuned, you know, like if I looked at this stuff, I probably wouldn't tell the difference between a Ford or Model T and a Prius.
Of course not. Of course not.
You know?
Because you haven't seen enough of it.
Yeah.
But you have seen enough cars, obviously.
Right,
cars,
exactly.
Thousands and thousands and thousands of cars. Well, I've seen thousands and thousands of artifacts. So most people who haven't seen artifacts, they can't tell the difference. You know, and that's how I profit, right?
Yeah.
You know, is I can go into somebody's house and find the real person, you know.
That's interesting. So who's this guy?
Oh yeah, you know, I put this image in here just because the beauty of field collecting is why you are looking for, you know, sculpture. You know, the market wants sculpture, figurative sculpture, maybe masks, maybe a colorful, beautiful, colorful shield. That's not what you find. You don't know what you're going to find when you go into these remote areas. You really have to keep an open mind and have an open aesthetic. And this is called a pig's tail billum, and it was in the remote part of Telefomin. And this was a tally of all the wild boars this not just this man, but his brothers, his uncles, his fathers, and his grandfathers have killed over 100, 150 years. And because the people are protein deficient, pigs were considered a wealth item. You were a successful family if you were continually and frequently able to eat meat, right? So these were a big source of pride to these people. And so they didn't have sculpture. They didn't have any kind of artifacts, but they had these billums, you know? I mean, I didn't end up buying it. It was too important to the guy. You can't buy something like that from the guy. It was too important. And you know, is it marketable? You don't know, you know? But it just shows that that's what I tried to do. You had to keep an open mind. You had to keep an open aesthetic. You know, often when I wasn't in the field, I'd send my other guys out, you know, for a week somewhere. And I remember this guy taking a photo of this like 11-foot tall fish basket shaped like a rocket. And I'm like, you know, I think I could sell that thing. But unfortunately, it's in a remote area where you only have these 4-passenger planes. It's like, forget it, I can't get it out.
Yeah.
But you know, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to, like, you know, will that work? You know, can I dust that thing off, put it on a display stand, and bring it to Paris? You know, that's what you're trying to do.
Interesting.
And you know, this is an ancestral shrine in somebody's personal house. You know, I thought it would be important to kind of discuss this one because one of the objects on the left-hand side is the tines of a very ornately carved bone comb. And there's one or two out in the world in museums and private collections. And most people think, oh, it's an item of personal decoration. It's, you know, it's something not necessarily to comb your hair, but to like stick in your hair as part of an item of personal decoration. But the beauty of field collecting is that you get to hear the real stories. And this particular comb was used for healing, right? So when somebody was severely injured in this area, they wouldn't go to a doctor. They didn't even go to the health clinic. They would go to this man. His name was Paul, and he was a retired policeman, but he had this. He was the manager of this shrine and this healing object. So then you go and you hear all the stories, and it's like, okay, this is not an item of personal adornment. It's a healing object. So I mean, it's nice to kind of get firsthand information about the use of the significance of these pieces that you know is just not published anywhere.
Right.
So that's what that's about. Just
Did that comb come out, or it stayed?
Well, he wouldn't, you know, it was too important.
Yeah.
He would just say, look, hey, Michael, you know, I'd love to sell it to you. I can't.
That's interesting.
Yeah, they still use it. They still use it as a thing.
I think that's
a masterpiece, you know.
Yeah, that's an important story to tell though, because it does. You know, you talked about like, you know, they're adults and they're making a choice, right? But it is important to hear the side where they do make the choice to not sell.
Lots of times.
Right,
well, most of the time, they won't show you something, right? So if they have something really good, they're not even going to show it to you, you know. So often I'll go to a village and I'll say, hey, look, I'm looking for these old masks, these old figures and stuff like that. And I'll say, do you guys have anything like that? And then the old men are no. And then some kids will be like, yeah, what about? And then the old men are like shushing the kid. And it's like, oh, okay. Come on, you guys, loosen up. Let me just see it. I won't buy it. Let me just see it, you know. But often, you know, there's mountain people, they make a decision.
But yeah, it is good to hear that they do make a decision. There is a decision point there. It goes
Just
either
like,
way, yeah.
Like I said, just like all of us, I have a watch from my grandfather. I'm not going to sell it. Doesn't matter. These people are maybe cash poor, but they live in areas where they have hundreds, if not thousands, of acres of land. I'd go with some guy, some remote village, and then I'd hire a guy to escort me to some next village, and we'd walk for hours, and he'd say, "This is all my land. This is all my land." What? All these beautiful tropical hardwood trees and mineral rights. I mean, just thousands and thousands of acres. And I try to tell them, well, I'm considered wealthy in America, but my piece of land is, I tell them, is about from here to there, and I don't own it, the bank owns it, and I may not own it my entire life, and then you kind of think, well, okay, who's rich and who's poor, and
Yeah. That's interesting. Who are these guys?
Yeah, this is just another thing what you might come across. This is on a very remote island called Tolakiva that usually is impossible to get to because the weather's bad. There was like this wonderful spell of calm weather, and I hired a dinghy, and I took a couple-hour trip out to it. And they're not known for figures. They're known for wooden bowls and other little small items. And then this woman brings this sopping wet old figure out. And I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And she's, so I'm like, what's the story? Well, it belonged to her husband, and then he died unexpectedly. And so she gave it to her son, and then he died unexpectedly. So we threw it into the swamp, and now you're here, we'll bring it to you. You want to buy it? I'll buy it. Yeah, and I think it's somewhere in Europe right now. I sold it originally to a very wealthy collector in New York. And
some baron that died unexpectedly.
Yeah, no, I'm waiting for that.
No. Wow.
Yeah. Now this is my last image, and this is basically this is a masterpiece I did not feel collect. It's it's an unbelievable, beautiful piece of art from an area that is the type of area I do feel collect in. I laminated this photo and took it with me for weeks in this mountain range in Morro Bay province, showing people, hey, have you seen something like this? Have you seen something like this? No. I know it was collected somewhere in this huge mountain range. And to me, that's a masterpiece, right? That is a Rembrandt. That is that's a world-class art object from any culture, and that is out there. And that's what I was looking for. I didn't find that particular piece, but that kind of drove me to cross all those miles and all those mountain ranges and stuff like that, was the hopes of finding something like that.
If you were to guess, how in that region, how many of those do you think there are in existence? Like, that's kind of like you look at a mountain, like how much gold do you think is in that mountain, right?
Well,
like how many pounds?
No. You would say zero, right? You would say zero until you see something like this and you think, that just can't exist, but it does exist, And so this was collected by some Swiss guy in the 50s or 60s. And so something like maybe there was one or two after that probably no longer exist, right? So if these things weren't considered important, they're bush houses that they live in, they last 8 years. And then they start disintegrating, and then they knock it down or they burn it or whatever. And anything that's not useful to them, they let it in there. So often I'll be going to houses that have been collapsed and digging through the stuff, and they're finding old bowls and plates and selling them to me. And so, this area, they're heavily missionized. So something like that might have existed in the 50s, 60s, probably does not exist today. It might. You never know. It's out there maybe.
What did that get valued at?
It's more than $1 million. I'd pay the guy $1 million for that thing. And that thing it's in Munich. I know the guy. I'm sure he's paid a lot of money for it. I don't know. To me, it's a world-class masterpiece. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, Michael, what we do at the end here is we like to do a Q&A from the audience and anybody that might be watching online. So Alec is going to pass the mic around. And I'm sure our audience has lots of questions. So if you guys out there would like to raise your hands if you have a question for Michael here. There we go.
I'm going to start, though, because I'm curious. one thing you touched on is that in a lot of cases, these people are more than eager to sell, these pieces to you. And in some cases, the value that we as outsiders place on them is not necessarily the same value that they place on them. With the culture changing kind of in our world as quickly as it has, how do you kind of adjust for that? Because me and my even limited experience traveling, kind of picking up different things from remote cultures, there's always this kind of push that there's an exploitative quality to that. That my personal experience, it didn't feel that way. These people, like you kind of mentioned, were eager to sell these things. They were, this was the equivalent of them selling a cast iron skillet to me, and I valued it much higher and paid them fairly for it. How has the art world and the legitimate art trade changed, and how have you kind of shifted to adapt to new narratives or new cultural attitudes towards tribal and indigenous art?
Well, like I said, it's been 12 years since I field collected, so I don't really do that anymore, But when I was doing it, it was a positive to my clients. They liked the story. They liked that I was there, that I did it. I wasn't just buying and selling. That I actually did the hard yards and got the piece. So to me, at that time, it was 100% positive. I don't know how it would be today. For sure less so. But you have to realize that what I try to tell people, just like you have to have the experience within that culture, with those particular people. You just can't think that, or can't believe that because we have years of college and access to Google, that somehow we're smarter than these people. That's just absolutely not true, right? When it comes down to it, these transactions are human and social transactions. And that's what they're the masters at. We're the ones who are deficient in that nowadays, and that's part of their culture for hundreds of years of exchanging and negotiating and sitting there and talking around the fire for hours and hours and hours a day. And we're stuck on our screens, So like a certain object, classic object type, could be worth $75 or $750,000, right? So you can Google all you want, and all you're going to know is, well, there's a range, right? How do I know what this particular thing's worth? Ultimately, you're going to have to find somebody who knows, and you're going to have to judge, can I trust that guy? And that's a human social thing that they're very good at, And they could read me, A lot of the transactions are just like, if somebody showed up to your door and said, I'm going to give you $500 for your cast iron skillet, you don't even think about it. Yep, it's gone. You're not going to go on Google and say, well, wait a second, is there some hot market for cast iron skillets I'm not really knowing about? You're just going to say, I don't want it, $500, I'm fine, right? So a lot of those transactions, that's what they are. They're like, means nothing to me. I'll take that. I'm happy with that. And then there's things where you come across objects that the people really value. And then it's negotiation. It's like, well, you know what? In my market, I'm going to take it, I'm going to display it, I'm going to put it in somebody's rich house, at the rich person's house. So that's how I describe it to the people of Papua New Guinea. Okay. And they have their thing. And then sometimes it's too important to them, so we don't agree, right? And sometimes, like a lot of transactions, they may not know the value, right? But they're like, well, what will this guy pay, right? And they're good at that. They're good at reading people. So sometimes I'll say, hey, I really like that, what would you want for that? And the guy will say, $1 million. And so I go, okay, here we go, and the negotiation starts from there, So, it's a complicated thing, But,
It's interesting.
Thank you, sir. That was amazing. I have 3 questions I'll couch as my one. What do you dream about when you're on the island? Question 1. And then for you, and I've lived in similar cultures, so this is with full authenticity, but what's the difference between a shaman and a schizophrenic, right? When you're talking to people who talk to God.
Yeah.
And then my third part of my one-part question is, can you tell the story of Michael Rockefeller and why you chose to ignore it?
First off, about dreaming, I wouldn't dream. You are the most healthy in New Guinea, right? You're not eating all this shit. You're walking 8 or 10 hours a day. When the sun goes down, you crawl in your mosquito net and you're dead. until the sun comes up. So there's no dreaming. And I don't know the difference between a shaman and the schizophrenic. I mean, I have no idea. I mean, that's beyond me. And what was the third one again? Michael Rockefeller. Funny enough, I do have an opinion on that. Because...
Fill us all in on Michael Rockefeller first.
Well, okay, well, I'm hardly an expert on Michael Rockefeller, but he was part of that Peabody Harvard expedition in 1960-61 to document, Peter Matheson was on that expedition, Robert Gardner, Michael Rockefeller, and they did it was mostly on the Indonesian side in the highlands, and then in the Azmat on the south coast. And so Michael Rockefeller there, in my understanding, I'm not an expert on it, was there after the major part of the expedition was over, and he was buying art for his uncle Nelson Rockefeller in the Metropolitan Museum in 1961 in the Azmat area. And that area is very tidal. It's very shallow bays and huge tidal ranges. And they were on a boat, I believe, and again, I'm not an expert, but I think like there was an engine problem or something, they were stranded, and they weren't that far from shore, and he decided, the engine conked down or whatever, and the boat was drifting out, and he decided to swim for it, and didn't make it, because there's enormous currents and tides in this area, and it's pretty dodgy. And that type of stuff has happened to me many, many times, where you're tempted to swim for it or whatever. I think he just swam for it and didn't make it, and what happened to his body, I have no idea. So I don't think there's I don't believe the whole cannibalism and all that type of thing. I think he just died a normal death like any other artifact buyer.
Does that happen a lot to your profession? Like
dying, but I've been on lots of boats that crapped out and you're really desperate.
I mean, the documentarians of Ring of Fire think he was killed in a ritual and retribution for Dutch atrocities that happened previously. I heard that story, right?
No, but yeah, I don't know. I don't put a lot of weight in that type of stuff. I mean, I'm very kind of like, I just go from my experience. It's like, this is what I suspect happened. I mean, 1961, there were a lot of people in that part of New Guinea in 1961. So I don't think they would just somehow pick this guy out. There were a lot of missionaries, Dutch colonial officials in that area. So he wasn't like super unique in that area. And that's my opinion.
All right. In the back there?
Yeah, I was just wondering, you mentioned them being part of the global economy and you actually giving them cash.
Mm-hmm.
Where did they spend it and what did they buy?
Well, okay, it depends how old you are, I mean, so like I said, the few things that they need cash for is school fees. So in all these very remote areas, even you have a little bush school that only teaches up to 2nd or 3rd grade, the government will charge that family like 20 kina, so the equivalent of $7 a year for that 1st grader to go to that school. And if it's a 4th grader, maybe it's $18 a year or whatever. And it's a 7th grader, the schools are further and further away from the village. So they may have to come up with a couple hundred kina, the currency of Papua New Guinea, a year for school fees. Kerosene maybe, salt or rice or tin food or hospital fees if somebody gets sick or something like that. So there's not a lot, but but then all of a sudden if you're somewhat close to a town, they're gonna buy beer. They're gonna go buy cases of beer or something like that, or they're gonna buy a radio, or who knows what they're gonna buy. But so I mean they want money. Like normal bride price in the old days varied from culture to culture, but it was often these big white clamshell rings carved from the fat part of a clamshell. And nowadays, nobody wants that. It's like, no, we want money. We want money. You want to marry my daughter, you got to pay real cash. So they're part of the world economy in that way. But there's and more and more things are available for them to buy.
Interesting. Good question. Thank you.
Hey, speaking of marrying daughters, did anybody try to marry you off?
No, you do not want to get messed up with that. You do not. That's That's the thing about Papua New Guinea is that all these kind of transactions and commitments go on forever, so it's like, no, thank you.
My question, I just thought it was so interesting. My question was, did you get malaria or
Yeah.
poisoning? I mean, it must have been rough.
Oh yeah, I have had the malaria 8 times. And,
Oh, wow.
that was the danger. The danger wasn't, crime or something, or wild animals or snake bite or something.
So did you take all the precautions? You get all the
I
shots?
did for years, but back then, I don't know how it is nowadays, but back then for malaria, you had to take it like 4 weeks before your trip, the entire time during your trip, and like another 4 weeks after, right? But I was going 4 times a year. So that means I'd have to be on the medication basically 365 days a year. And I was still getting malaria. So at the end, I was like, screw it, I'm gonna stop taking the precautions. I'm just gonna get the malaria and I'll treat the malaria. And that's what I did. And then I got so that I could recognize it super fast. I could recognize it within 20 minutes of it coming on. There was a certain twinge in my back or something like that. I'm like, that's, like you somehow
There we
between your
go again.
shoulders, like you did some sort of workout, but I didn't work out. And then all of a sudden you start sweating or something like this, like, okay, I'm taking my medicine right now. And then, then the malaria gets up ahead of steam, but if you knock it, if you attack it quite early, it only lasts a day.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it wasn't so bad.
All right, back here.
I'm curious, was there areas or were there groups of people who were a family of carvers or experts that you could find and locate, or people who were known as artisans, either part of the family or part of a clan or part of a group where you would find things?
No, not really, because they existed, but they were in the areas I didn't go to, right? They would be in the Sepik River and the Papuan Gulf, some of the kind of traditional classic areas that produced great art 100 years ago and are still producing quite attractive carvings made for sale to buyers or tourists who happen to show up. But those are the exact areas I avoided. So the areas I went to, they may still have a traditional carver, but he would be making bowls or drums or something like that. And I was looking for old things, I wasn't looking for their recent productions. For a drum, I would always ask, look, everybody has a drum. If there's 4 million people in Papua New Guinea, okay, say there's 2 million men, say there's 1 million men between the ages of 16 and 60. Of that million men, 800,000 have a drum, right? They're so, everywhere. So I could always go into a village and ask for a drum or something like that, and I know I'd get them. And most of the time they're new drums. And I'd say, oh, no. I want the black drum that's in the rafters, that's dirty and the skin's broken. That's the type of thing I was asking. I wasn't asking for the new productions. Yeah.
Right here.
So this is, again, with the new production, I've bought a few masks over the years that I know are not old. But what is the one thing that you might look for in, how do you determine old from new as far as the collector that's at the swap meet or the thrift store or something like that? And I have a follow-up to that.
Yeah, well, funny you say that. Okay, look, I have a website called oceanicart.com, right? And I have a section called essays. And one of my essays is called Authenticity Matters. And it's a very long essay with lots of photographs. And I tell exactly all the different kind of characteristics you look for in a piece to tell if it's authentically used. Like for a mask, right? You have to say, well, was it danced? Right? Masks are meant to be danced. They're meant to be worn, usually not directly on the face, but in New Guinea it's on the top of a costume that rests on the shoulders. So a mask, like there's a mask somewhere in this building, this Sepik mask, right? It's unfortunately not authentic because it doesn't have holes around the edge because that mask had to be lashed to a superstructure. So the first thing you look for in a mask was how was it attached to something? Because if it wasn't attached to something, it wasn't worn. So you look for holes around the perimeter for attachment. Then you look for signs of life, right? Because these masks manifested spirits. So these masks would have been named and they would be considered living beings, and they would have had decorations like on their ears and their nose. So there's always holes around the ears where the little string would have been attached. There's a hole in the nose where a piece of bone or string or wood would have been through here. And you look for pigments, because pigments were the magical quality that made that brought the mask to life. And if you don't see any pigments, or maybe they were washed away, but if there was no trace of only one layer of pigment, you basically have to question it. You look for layers of pigments.
Interesting.
Thank you. Also, do you think that in Western Papua New Guinea, when the Indonesian government eventually moves out of the area and allows the indigenous people to have a free reign, that there's going to be a lot more field exploration. It's going to allow people to have access to those artisans in that area that are now currently repressed by the Indonesian government against those people of West Papua New Guinea.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, you would assume so, but I don't know what's going on out in those remote villages, what kind of missionary activity or lack thereof, or, I mean, there's some wonderful remote areas I can only imagine.
It's not a lot of field collecting going on the west side, though?
No, certain areas on the north coast and on the south coast, but like the interior, I don't know. I don't think so.
Interesting.
There's big areas that potentially could have stuff, but I don't know politically or what's happening in those interior villages, if they're following their culture or not. I have no idea.
All right, let's take a couple more questions here.
Thank you very much. It's been a very informative lecture. There used to be a member in this club who would say, "Where'd you bleed? Or where'd you cry to mom? And where'd you almost die?" We got the almost die, which is great. And next thing I want to ask is, did you ever hear any traces of the story of the Americans who crashed in New Guinea that were pulled out? And was it handed down to you during World War II? Was it ever talked to the remote villagers? Or?
It's funny, yeah, it was very important. American presence in Papua New Guinea was very important. My grandfather served in Papua New Guinea in the Navy, and I always told him that, "Tubrublo me, I've stopped in Papua New Guinea. I've been soldier in Papua New Guinea." I tell him, "Hey, my ancestor, my grandfather was here." "Oh, thank you. So yeah, you see a lot of remnants. In fact, the Japanese are better at it, to tell you the truth. You go into remote villages and they'll have shrines. And the Japanese pay that particular village a certain, $700 a year or something like that, to have a certain area of it cleaned and like a burial ground and planted flowers and swept neatly. One time I came across some dog tags and I contacted the military to try to put them in the right place. Yeah, there's still a big presence there. It's still a big part of their consciousness and their memory.
All right, two more?
Thank you. Yeah, great talk. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it. How about the language? I mean, there's so many different dialects spoken in Papua New Guinea. And what's your fluency, or did you have an interpreter?
No, it's all talk pigeon. It's Melanesian talk pigeon. So everybody, because there's 700 or 800 languages, you have to speak Melanesian talk pigeon, and I spoke it much better then than I do now because I haven't used it in 12 years. But when you're there, it's all about communication, right? You're having to communicate. You're having to repeatedly tell the people time and time again why I'm here, who I am, what I'm looking for, what I'm willing to pay, and so you're speaking constantly. So it's talk pigeon.
And then how about getting the art and artifacts out of the country? Was that a problem with customs?
No, I mean, it kind of went in waves. Sometimes they were very strict and sometimes they weren't. But what I started doing was, I had a very good relationship with the National Museum there, and I started collecting for them. Because I was going to remote places I knew they didn't have examples from. So it's like, you know what, I'm going to, make a good impact right from the start. So I would say, okay, here are the ones I'm going to donate to you. I'm going to donate these 30 pieces to you. And then I want an export permit for these 300 other pieces like that. And it usually worked,
Right.
So I never had a problem. One of my initial trips, there was actually an American guy running the museum there, kind of like said, "Oh, you can't take that out, you can't take that out." And I was like, "What?" I actually went into the museum before I even started my trip and said, "I'm going to go to these areas, I'm going to collect these objects." They said, fine. And then I go to those exact areas and collect those objects, and they said, "Oh, you can't do that." And that was like one time at the very beginning, and after that, it was kind of smooth sailing.
All right. Well, hey, Michael, thank you very much for joining us. We very much enjoyed this talk. Thank you for stopping by. Stick around for a second. We got a certificate for all of you watching online. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time at the Adventurers Club.